We are live. Professor Natalie Lawrence, welcome to the show. Sorry, I stumbled over my words. I haven't even got started yet. We're going to be talking about the neuroscience of overeating. Welcome, Natalie.
Thank you.
Good. I'm so pumped to have you here because I think that we spend so much time focusing on teaching people to eat the right foods, and we spend like very little time in this industry teaching people about their brains and how big a role the brain plays in behavior change. And so you are a cognitive neuroscientist. Before we get cracking, can you just unpack what a cognitive neuroscientist is?
Sure. So cognition is how we think, and neuroscience is the study of nerve cells or brain processes that underlie those thinking processes. So a cognitive neuroscientist studies the biology of how we think. So, for example, we might do MRI scans where we ask people to engage in certain tasks and image what's going on in their brain at the same time.
Okay. And so you've obviously done a lot of research to get there. And like one of the things that I've read about you doing is something called neuropsychological mechanisms. Could you explain that in a bit more detail as well?
Yeah, so I guess if we're thinking about overeating, a neuropsychological mechanism to explain that might be when people have certain food cues around them, either the foods or adverts or anything that triggers a desire to eat, what's happening in the brain. So we might be activating the reward system, we might be increasing attention to the foods, we might be triggering a motor response to approach that food and pick it up and eat it. And at the same time, if we've got a goal to eat more healthily, we might be trying to activate inhibitory responses. So kind of, suppressing those urges or those motor responses. So all of these processes are, we can look at the bits of the brain involved and we can talk about them as a psychological process. So they're sort of neuropsychological.
Okay. So you're saying that basically there is a physical part of your brain that has this decision to, like the cupcake relationship. The relationship you have with a cupcake is actually like a physical piece of your brain. Even though it seems like it's a thought. And that's what's firing when you're making a decision to whether or not to eat?
Yeah, so we know that whenever people are confronted with rewarding cues, whether that's food or money or an attractive person of the opposite sex or the same sex, whatever, whatever does it for you, there's certain parts of the brain that become active. They're involved in reward and motivation. So they're not specific to food, but they are strongly activated by foods that are very rewarding. And some people show this response, say, to pictures of food far more than other people. And lots of research has shown that people that respond more to pictures of food in this way eat more and gain more weight over time.
So you said that you've been doing brain imaging. What were some of the, so brain imaging, as I understand it, is you're doing MRIs on people's brains, right? And so you put them in this tray and you scan their brain and show them pictures of food, which sounds quite sadistic, by the way. But what were some of the findings that you got from that?
We found that people that had stronger responses in these reward parts of the brain to the pictures of food compared to non-food things like stationary products, those not as exciting. So that difference in activation in the brain predicted how much people ate after the scan. So we gave people loads of different questionnaires and tests to do after the scan, and at the same time we gave them a massive bowl of crisps, and without telling them, we then measured how much they ate. And so the amount their brain was activated when they saw the picture of the food earlier predicted how much they ate later on. But interestingly, we took ratings of things like, how often do you eat crisps? How much do you like them? And those personal ratings that people filled out didn't predict how much they ate, but how the brain responded to the pictures did predict it. So we think that these measures you can take from the brain activity are kind of a more relevant or more direct measure of your kind of subconscious motivation, if you like. And it doesn't always tally with what you say you feel or what you report to other people. So sometimes you've got to get in and kind of directly measure what's going on in the brain, not just rely on asking people.
Do you think that's related to people thinking, always answering with their, what is it, the best case scenario? So that whenever you're filling in a form, you think of, you answer it as a, like, in an ideal world, yes, this would be my answer.
Yeah, possibly. So there's all sorts of effects that might influence how people respond, right? So one might be trying to put across your best self. One might be trying to guess what the researcher wants you to say and trying to give the right answers that you think, like, the aims of the experiment are after. I don't know. So that's the problem with Selfreport, is that it's often quite messy. It's not necessarily honest. Sometimes people just genuinely don't really have access to what really drives their behavior. So they might be answering questions and thinking, oh, I don't know, really. Why do I go for these foods? Or how easy is it for me to resist them? I don't know. How easy is it for me compared to other people? I don't know what it's like. You can kind of overthink it, right? And so
absolutely, yeah. So you're saying that, because a brain scan, you can't like lie on a brain scan, right? That's just how it is. But it seems almost like unfortunate that if your brain, so what you're saying basically is, if your brain reacts in a certain way to food, then you're done. like you're just gonna eat more food. So then, but that was just the beginning of the study. So then you took it further and you developed some intervention methods. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so you're right. Like, it is a bit unfair. Some people have this predisposition to react a lot to these food cues, and that's partly conditioned through experience, repeatedly eating the foods and getting pleasure from them. It's partly genetic. So we know that, some of these, how these brain areas work, is partly inherited. But we don't think you're kind of stuck with it. So some people show this strong reward response, but they also can very effectively control their behavior. So if you are able to learn these strategies, you can kind of turn that around, right? So it might be that these foods trigger a really big impulse in you or urge in you, but if that impulse and urge, then you kind of repeatedly associate that with eating something else, or going for a walk, or doing some meditation. I don't know. There's all kinds of like replacement or substitute activities you can try and learn to engage in when you get that strong urge. So I think it might be harder for some people to eat healthily and lose weight than others, but I don't think we're not just victims of fate and stuck with it. There are strategies you can learn. So our research is then trying to come up with interventions that could particularly help these people.
Cool. So you said basically so what you're saying is you can train your brain to attach another method of like soothing. There's a book I read called, I think it's by Robin Adler, called 50 Ways to Soothe Yourself Without Food. And like, I think if you look at that, you're like, well, but it's never going to scratch the itch, because it's just really want a cupcake. So how do you actually program your brain to then latch onto that and then default to the thing that's not food? Is that possible?
So the training that we've come up with is one way that you can try and do that. So in the game, pictures of foods will come up on the screen, and some of them are healthy foods, fruits and vegetables, and some of them are less healthy foods like chocolate and chips and that kind of thing. And in the game, it's a reaction time game, and you're told to quickly press as fast as you can when you see foods.
Here's the game, by the way. This is the app you're talking about. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, so the foods in the green circle, like the cucumber there, you have to touch it as quickly as you can, and then it gives you your feedback at the end of a few trials, and you're kind of told to keep trying to improve your speed. And then if something is in a red circle, then you have to sit as still as you can and not move. Okay, which sounds a bit weird. So you mustn't touch that food, and if you do touch that food, you'll lose a point. So you kind of get punished for going for the chocolate in that example.
Yeah.
And so we think that by repeatedly playing this very simple game, the associations that your brain has, so instead of thinking, oh, when I see cucumber and vegetables, I'm not that fussed, which sadly is what a lot of us are kind of by default, gets replaced with, oh, when I see cucumber and vegetables, then I get really excited and I want to go for it. And I know I get rewarded with points for going to those foods.
Yeah, that's how to win.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas for the foods in red, the less healthy foods, sadly, most of us would, when we see those foods, our brains get very excited. We're anticipating a reward. We would start preparing a motor response to approach that food and eat it. So what we're trying to do with the game is to change that automatic response with one that's stop. So whenever I see chocolate, I kind of put on the brakes. My inhibition centers of the brain are like, right, inhibit that response. You don't excite the reward system. You don't excite the motor system. And so some people report that after playing the game for a while, these foods that used to be really attention grabbing and really motivating for them, someone said, oh, it's, they become like paper clips to me. I can just take them or leave them. They just kind of become these neutral foods. Like if people bring in cake or biscuits at work, oh, I can just walk past it and take it or leave it. Whereas before it was like this magnet that I just felt like I couldn't resist. So it's about, even though it's just a simple game, you're just really trying to train the associations that are held in your brain with these different foods. And it seems that it can spill over into how you then react to them in everyday life.
What's happening in the brain while you're doing that? The physical on a cellular level?
Well, so early on in the training, when you first see the foods, you'll kind of get this desire you'll get this excitation of the motor system and attention areas waking up to go for it. And what you have to do is inhibit that. So what you can see early on is that you get engagement of prefrontal areas in the cortex that inhibit responses. It's like an effortful thing, right? It's quite hard. And then over time, like the more people do the training, instead of seeing that kind of effortful inhibition, what you see is just less activation of reward and motor responding. So before people do the training, these foods will trigger the kind of responses I was talking about earlier, like increased activation of the motor and the reward areas and attentional processing. After a month of doing the training, not even a huge amount, but just, a few days every week, those areas have become a lot less active. So it's like what the foods were kind of doing to turn you on at the start are just no longer really having that effect on you.
That's fascinating. So essentially, it's like a diet. I mean, I say a diet because I don't have another word for it, but it's not a diet. Like you're not telling anyone what to eat in the form of a meal plan, but it has the same effect because it gets people to stop eating junk, right?
Yeah, that's the idea. And people don't even need to be aware. In all the early studies that we did about 10 years ago in the lab, we got undergraduates to come in, we gave them these different training tasks to do, and then gave them buffets and food to eat. And they weren't aware of what we were trying to achieve. They just thought, oh, you gave me this task to do, and I saw loads of pictures of food. So we asked them at the end, do you think that the games made you hungrier? And they all said, yeah, I think you probably made me crave food more and made me hungrier, even though we gave some of them the training that had the opposite effect, right? So you could see that they ate less after doing the inhibition training to food, but they were thinking, oh, you showed me loads of nice food pictures, so probably I'm craving food more. So it doesn't, I mean, obviously now when we put it on the App Store or whatever, but people know full well what we're trying to achieve, and that's why they download it and go at it. But the early work wasn't like that. So people don't even need to be aware of what you're doing and what you're trying to achieve. It probably just happens almost unconsciously.
That's crazy. And then you got results. So people lost weight on the trial. So how long was the trial, and what kind of results did you get?
Yeah, so the first lot of studies were just looking at how much people ate immediately after the training. And there's been quite a few studies showing reduced intake. And then we thought, okay, well, does this work in the real world? So we asked people to just log on from their computers at home or work and just play it for 4 days in a week, 10 minutes a day. And we measured their weight the week before they did the training and then a week later, so 2 weeks apart. We got them to come in, stand on the scales. And they lost about 700 grams on average just after a week of training. And then we kind of phoned people up a month later and then 6 months later. And it seemed that the weight loss, if anything, got a bit larger. But the long-term effects we're not so sure about because we were asking people to report their weight to us. So it's not as reliable as actually getting someone to stand on a scale in front of you. And we also asked people to keep food diaries. And so we compared what they were eating in the week before the training to a week afterwards. And we converted all their food diaries into energy intake per day. And on average, people who did the training ate about 220 kilocalories less a day.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, just from my experience, because we have a food tracking app, if you get someone to track just without any other intervention, they will eat less because they have to, because you suddenly realize, like we tell people, you got to track your food for the first week, and they're like, oh my goodness, I never realized how much I was eating. And then week 2, they're like, basically fasting.
Yeah, so that's we had this kind of week of monitoring before we gave them the intervention, and we also had a control group that did all exactly the same measures and the food diaries, and were being weighed by the same researcher, and they had a computer task to do as well. But in their one, there weren't pictures of food; there were just pictures of things like gardening tools and household objects. But they were still having to inhibit. So we kind of said, oh, this is a brain training game. Like, we're teaching you to kind of inhibit your responses. And I think, people kind of buy that, right? Because there are lots of general brain training games out there. So
what does this research mean in the greater scheme of things? Like, where would you like to see it going or being applied?
So I think one important lesson is that there might be other ways of approaching behavior change for diet. So not just educating people or telling them what they should be eating or asking them to self-monitor and then, effortfully use their willpower, but to actually try and understand, well, what are these more automatic processes, maybe that are less kind of open to our conscious awareness, and can we kind of try and get in and modify them? So, for example, some people use hypnotherapy to do that, with suggestion. And these computer games are another way of trying to do that, of repeatedly training your brain. Some people are getting people to train their attention away from foods. We're training people to not respond to the foods. There's lots of things you can train in terms of cognition and how the brain works. And I just think it's really exciting that, we might have a new tool, basically, and that it might be effective for people for whom some of those other interventions haven't worked so well.
Or supplementary as well. Something to add in. I would always recommend throwing everything you can at the problem, basically. Something else that caught my attention. This is pretty much the opposite of what advertising and food branding is doing. So, and I have this is my thing. Like, I want food advertising to like die, basically. But surely because when you look at a food advert, like a Snickers or, Lionel Messi carrying a packet of Lay's, isn't that doing exactly the opposite or the same thing, but in a negative way? Do you have anything to say about food advertising and neural pathways?
Oh, I'm the same as you. I wish we just banned all food advertising. I mean, sadly, there's even evidence that if you get, certain producers to advertise their healthy products, just the brand itself will prime desire for their unhealthy products. So, advertising any food really can increase people's appetite and desire to eat. And then if all the food they've got in the house is unhealthy, then that's just not helpful. So yeah, advertising for me is just really bad. I don't really see why it's necessary. If you want to find out about new food products, just see them in the shop or look up the website, or I don't know.
Like, we don't need to be reminded to eat. That's built in. It's like it's hungry.
No, and we know, from like the neuroimaging studies we've done, you just show people pictures of tempting foods and you activate those brain pathways that make you want to eat, even if people aren't aware of it, and then they'll eat more afterwards, right? Even if they're not reporting that they want to eat, that brain activity can translate into eating more. So
I'm not sure if I was reading. Sorry, no, carry on.
No, I'm just saying, if you're constantly being exposed to these images or videos, or as you say, celebrities that you look up to and like, and this is the other thing, if you show a tempting food with other rewards, which might be attractive people looking happy, a celebrity you really look up to, that increases that association between the food and reward in your brain, right? So again, it's making that food even more tempting to you. So it's all about association. So anything that increases the positive associations of those foods is going to make it harder for you to resist it. Anything that increases the negative associations or the inhibition that's associated with that food will make it easier for you to resist it.
That, yeah, from your lips to God's ears, I guess. What is it that we can do, or like how is there like a study that an authority would need to see to affect some kind of legislation around food marketing, or are we too far gone?
I think there is quite a lot of evidence. So, I mean, in the UK now, the government just announced, I think today, they're just announcing new policies to ban all advertising on TV before 9 o'clock for, unhealthy foods. And
what do you know the definition of healthy? What their definition is?
Well, they use that nutrient profiling model. So it's foods that have got above a certain amount of sugar, fat, and salt in would not be allowed to be advertised. So I don't know exactly what those levels are, but it is all kind of laid out. So yeah, that it'll be interesting to see the details of that policy. But that has been going on for years in this country, discussing these kind of measures. And there is a strong evidence base, which seems to now finally be getting through. But I think, we've had lots of studies done showing that if people are exposed to food advertising, they eat more unhealthy foods, particularly children. So it depends how you measure it. If you do a study with a load of adults and they're kind of aware that you're showing them adverts and they guess the aim of the study, they could counteract the effects a little bit. But if you try and measure it in a more clever way and people, aren't thinking about it so much, or in children who are not really as aware of all this stuff, then you can see the effects.
Yeah, I mean, it's great that they're implementing policy. I just think that, they must be getting a ton of VAT, or it is VAT in the UK, VAT or whatever, or something from these companies. Because if they really wanted to make a shift, they would be able to do it quite quickly. Even, I mean, I remember after Boris got COVID, he said, like, we are taking obesity down. So maybe that's why this act has passed. Crazy.
Well, I mean, it was in the David Cameron government's obesity plan, and then in Theresa May's, and now Boris, traditionally has been very anti-nanny state, but people are saying, well, his brush with death and COVID has changed his mind about this. But yeah, I mean, it should be coming in, and it should also apply to online advertising, because we've seen in the past, like Ofcom banned advertising for junk food on children's TV, around children's TV programs. But then the food companies just increased the advertising around family programs at like 6 p.m. So these policies can sometimes backfire, right? If people just react to them by circumventing them and advertising more elsewhere. So people are saying it really has to be kind of online, social media, product placement in YouTube clips, across the board for it to work.
Yeah, that's. I mean, we could talk about this all day. So the last point was there's a Formula Act in South Africa on the advertising of formula. So and it's so ironic because like formula, if your baby can't feed and it doesn't have a mother, like formula can save your life. Now I'm not saying breast isn't best and whatever, but it literally can save a life. And so the marketing on formula is so strict that distributors aren't even allowed to give deals to their resellers. So you're not allowed to do like a 2-for-1 special. You're not allowed to have any like bright colors. They are literally like actual, what's it called, a hex code that are like banned from certain packaging. And it's almost like there's like a little micro communism thing around formula where it's so controlled because they don't want it to be appealing to anyone at all. Like you only do this if you absolutely have to. And I'm like, why don't they just roll that out over all food? I mean, because people are just getting bombarded. This is a fantastic model, what you're talking about, brain training and everything, but you have to opt in,
Yeah.
And no one's opted in to being told like puffed rice soaked in sugar is what you should have for breakfast.
Yeah, I mean, this is the problem. So people talk about a nanny state and saying, oh, what about individual choice and free will? You're going to take all that away. Well, for me, I see the current environment as taken away my individual choice and free will, because we're constantly being primed with unhealthy foods. And I've got young children. It's like, as an adult, I might have decent self-control or have enough kind of nous to think about other strategies. But for kids, it's like they're just stimulus response little machines, right? They're just going to see this stuff, and if they've tasted it, their brain's going to go zing, and remind them of how delicious it is, and they're just going to pester you for it. So I think the current environment takes away our free will. I think if we didn't have all these constant reminders to make us want to eat unhealthily, we could probably do much better.
Totally agree. So I wanted to chat briefly about mood and eating. So a lot of our clients suffer from depression, many medicated for it. And there's this binge cycle we talk about quite a lot, where you're sad because you eat and you eat because you're sad. Can you talk about some of the neuroscience behind that and maybe touch on a bit of your research?
Yeah, so a lot of people emotionally eat. So we know that when people have a low mood, the relative rewarding value of something like a food high in fat and sugar. And so these hedonic foods that we call them, they're very potent stimulators of the brain's reward system. You get increases in dopamine release, increases in endogenous opioids that are kind of associated with pleasure. Similar to some drugs of abuse, some of these foods could be really strong stimulators like that. Now, if you're in a low mood, that is a particularly appealing prospect, even if you don't think about it consciously. Your brain's kind of in this state of reward deficiency, if you like. So something that's going to stimulate your reward system becomes even more attractive than when you're in a good mood. And so when people eat these foods when they're in a low mood and they feel this temporary pleasure and this temporary relief, your brain learns to associate those things. So next time you're in a low mood, it's going to tell you, well, hey, maybe you can self-medicate and self-soothe with this food again, because last time that made you feel good for a while. And studies have shown that when people are put into a low mood, either with sad music or sad memories, their brain reward system is even more active in response to pictures of hedonic foods than when they're in a neutral mood. So it's almost like you're just making those foods even harder to resist when you're in a low mood.
Wow. Why do we do that thing where we know that something's not, we consciously, intellectually know that it's the wrong thing to do, but then we do it anyway? So we know that like it's not going to make us happy, and we hate that we're overweight, but we do it anyway. Is there like a scientific reason for that?
Yeah, so we talk a lot in psychology about the two different sort of systems that govern our behavior. So you've got the kind of conscious system where you've got your goals and your plans, and it's very logical, and then you've got your unconscious system, which really acts through associations, conditioned responses that you've experienced in the past. And sadly, that system is activated more rapidly than your conscious one. So often you'll get a kind of response that's triggered just because those foods or those cues activate that desire or that response to go and get them. And then your kind of conscious system is a bit sluggish. It might kick in a bit later. So in a way, you're kind of constantly trying to close the stable door after the horse has bolted. Like you get this boom. As soon as you see the foods, very early neuronal responses are triggered in attention and reward areas. And then this motor kind of desire to act is triggered. And then you're sort of trying to dampen that down after it's already been evoked. So it can feel like there's, two parts of you and you're not in control of your behavior. And that's because the more conscious part is struggling really to rein back in these unconscious impulses.
Like you only come to when there's a Krispy Kreme graveyard in your kitchen, and you're like, what have I done? Where were you like 5 minutes ago before this happened? Amazing. Well, it has been unbelievable chatting to you, Natalie. I hope that everyone watching this absolutely loved it. If you're watching this on Facebook, please share it. If you're watching YouTube, copy the link and share it to people. They need to see this. And what a pleasure chatting to you. So just to touch base again before I go, this is your app. the Food Trainer app. You can get it to this. So this is there's a link to the app page on the Exeter website in this post, both on YouTube and Facebook. Is there anything else you want to say about it before we go?
I guess, just give it a go. It just takes 4 minutes to play. Some people say it's super helpful for them. Some people say it doesn't seem to affect them much. So we're still trying to figure out who it works for, what it is about. We think that some people have these really strong reward responses to foods, and so there's a lot to change, and so it might work better for those people. Some people have other issues with food, like maybe it's portion size or so it might not work for everyone, but just give it a go and just keep at it, because you might not notice anything straight away, but it might take a week or 2 weeks, and then if you've played it a little bit every day, you might think, oh, hang on, now I just don't feel like going for the biscuits as much. I don't really know why. So a lot of people will report this kind of weird, well, I went in the kitchen to get a treat, but then when I looked at it, I just didn't really feel like it anymore, and it was a really odd feeling. And so just see if that happens to you. The other thing to say is try and sit still while you're playing it, because it's all about motor inhibition, right? So don't play it walking around on the move. Try and sit somewhere and focus on it. And when those foods that you're trying to resist come up, sit as still as you possibly can.
Okay, so stay present. Cool. Natalia, it's been a pleasure. Have a wonderful afternoon. And hopefully we can get you back on soon when 2.0 is out. And it's
we're always improving it with user feedback. So yeah.
All the best. Bye.
Thanks.